The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It slid down the stone walls of the northern fortress like veins of silver, whispering secrets the living no longer dared to speak. Deep beneath that fortress past corridors where torches burned low, and Omega lay chained to the ground. His wrists were torn, his breath shallow, and yet, when the iron door opened, his silver eyes lifted toward the sound. Alpha Kael'dravian stepped through, his cloak heavy with rainwater, his boots echoing softly on the stone. His presence filled the dungeon like thunder, commanding, cold, unyielding. The guards bowed their heads, afraid to meet his gaze. He was their alpha, their warlord, the one who burned 3 villages for betrayal. And tonight, he stood before the man accused of betraying him most. Elias did not speak. He only watched as Kael approached, torchlight catching the faint tremor in his lips. The chains clinked when he moved, a frail sound swallowed by silence. Kael stopped a few feet away. The scent of damp earth and rust mingled with something faint, something he should not have remembered. Rain and lavender. He hated that it made his chest tighten. "You're still alive," Kael said quietly. Elias's lips curved, barely, and disappointed, the alpha's jaw tensed. He should have struck him, demanded answers, torn the truth out with force. But something in the Omega's voice, soft, resigned, unraveled the fury he came to unleash. For nights Kael had dreamt of this moment, of staring into those silver eyes and feeling nothing. Yet now, standing here, he felt everything he had buried claw its way back to life. "We stood by," Elias said, "because you told me to." The words struck him like a blade. He opened his mouth to deny them, but memory betrayed him. The battlefield, the smoke, the blood. He had ordered Elias to stay behind. And still, his brother had died. The silence between them grew heavy, thick with ghosts. Kael turned as if to leave, but moonlight spilled through the barred window above them, brushing Elias's face with pale light. And then Kael saw it, a faint shimmer circling the Omega's wrist. A mark, not ink, not scar, something older. He moved closer, his breath caught in his throat. The glow pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, a mark of the moon's choosing. "Where did you get that?" Kael demanded. Elias didn't answer. His chains rattled softly as he shifted, the light following his movement. Kael reached out before he could stop himself, fingertips grazing the mark. A hum filled the air, deep and ancient, rippling through the stones beneath them. Kael's chest tightened, his breath trembled. The mark pulsed again beneath his hand, warmth spreading up his arm. He pulled away sharply, the connection severed like a wound reopening. Elias exhaled shakily, eyes glistening. "You shouldn't have come here tonight." Kael's voice lowered. "What are you hiding?" Elias turned his face toward the window. "Is something you won't understand until you stop seeing me as your prisoner." "You see you for what you are," Kael growled. "A traitor." Elias's gaze met his, unwavering. "And why do your hands shake every time you touch me?" The alpha went still. The words cut deeper than claws ever could. His fingers indeed trembled. He clenched them into fists. "Oh, you speak as though you know me." "Did," Elias whispered, "before you buried your heart under armor." Kael stepped back, chest rising and falling. The dungeon felt smaller, the air thicker. Thunder rolled across the mountains outside, echoing through the walls. He turned toward the door, but something, perhaps pride, perhaps longing, kept him there. "Tell me what really happened that night," he said. Elias hesitated, then shook his head. "You wouldn't believe me. Try me." For a moment, only Rain spoke. Then quietly Elias said, "It wasn't me who betrayed you, Kael. It was them, the council. They feared what we were becoming." Kael's heart stilled. "What we were?" Elias looked down at his wrist where the mark still glowed faintly. "You felt it just now, didn't you? The bond? The moon doesn't choose lightly. You and I," his voice faltered. "We were meant to stand together." Kael stared at him, unable to breathe. "Mates!" The word lingered, unspoken, forbidden. No alpha of the North had ever been bound to an Omega. It defied every law of their kind. "We's," Kael said, but it came out softer than he intended. Elias smiled faintly, a ghost of sadness. "Believe what you must. The moon remembers even when men forget." Lightning flared, casting their shadows across the wall. One towering, one kneeling, bound together by the same light. For an instant, Kael saw not a prisoner but the man who once stood beside him in battle, laughing under the rain, promising loyalty with eyes brighter than stars. He turned away, but his voice trembled. "You'll stay here until I learn the truth." Elias nodded once, tiredly. "Then I'll wait. The moon has patience, even if you don't." Kael's eyes lingered on him a final moment before he strode to the door. The guards outside straightened as it opened, their torches swaying in the draft. Cale hesitated at the threshold, his reflection caught faintly in the iron. Cold eyes. Colder heart. Colder heart. But behind him, Elias whispered something he almost didn't hear. The heir is already waiting, Cale. Cale froze. He turned sharply, but the Omega had lowered his head again, eyes closed, lips sealed. What did you say? Elias didn't answer. The dungeon was silent except for the steady rhythm of rain and the faint hum of the moonmark glowing through the dark. Cale's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He stepped back once, then again until the door closed between them. The lock clicked, and the corridor swallowed him in shadows. Outside, the storm broke fully, rain crashing against the earth like war drums. But beneath it all, in the deepest part of the fortress, one truth had already begun to awaken. Quiet, forbidden, and destined. The Omega he had chained in the dungeon was carrying something far greater than guilt, something that belonged to them both. The storm had swallowed the fortress whole by the time Cale reached his chambers. Lightning pulsed through the high windows, painting his reflection in fragments of blue and gold. He stripped off his soaked cloak and poured himself a glass of black mead, though it did little to quiet the pounding in his chest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elias. Those silver eyes glinting under the moonlight, that cursed mark glowing where no mark should exist. He set the glass down, hard liquid sloshing over the rim. The sound echoed in the silence, sharp and lonely. For years, Cale had trained himself to master every weakness, hunger, grief, desire, but the Omega's words clung to him like smoke. The heir is already waiting. What did that mean? Was it a threat? A delusion? Or something far more dangerous? He paced the length of the chamber, the thunder outside rolling like a heartbeat. The walls of the fortress, once symbols of his power, now felt like a cage closing in. He remembered the night Elias had been captured, how the guards had dragged him in, bruised and silent, accused of conspiring with the southern packs. Cale hadn't asked for proof. He hadn't wanted it. Grief had needed someone to blame, and Elias had been there. But tonight, for the first time, doubt stirred beneath the surface of rage. A knock came at the door. Leora entered quietly, her long hair still damp from the rain. She was the only one who could walk into his chamber unannounced and survive it. In her hands was a folded parchment. "The council demands you finish the execution before dawn," she said, her voice steady but cautious. "They say the Omega's presence dishonors the pack." Cale's eyes flickered toward the fire. "And what do you say?" Leora hesitated. "I say the moon doesn't mark traitors." Her words landed between them like a blade. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Cale, you felt it too, didn't you?" "The mark reacts only to its match." Cale turned sharply. "You speak like the priestess. Be careful." "I speak like your sister," she said softly. "The moon chooses for reasons we can't always see." "If Elias carries something—" "Enough," he snapped, though his voice cracked with more weariness than anger. "He betrayed me. I will not rewrite the past just because his skin glows in the dark." Fiora studied him quietly, then sighed. "Maybe not, but sometimes the past isn't finished with us." She placed the parchment on his table and left without another word. Cale stared at the folded message but didn't open it. Instead, he moved to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked courtyard. The scent of wet earth drifted in, and with it came the memory of a night long ago, before the war, before the blood. A night when he and Elias had stood beneath the same moon, their hands almost touching, the promise of something unnamed hanging between them. He shook his head, as if the memory itself was betrayal. But the harder he tried to forget, the clearer it became. The way Elias had laughed softly when Cale first taught him to ride, how he used to whisper the moon's old songs under his breath. That laughter had died the night Cale's brother fell. And Cale had buried his heart with him. The wind howled through the cracks in the stone. Somewhere below, a door slammed. He didn't realize he was moving until his hand gripped the cold iron handle of the dungeon gate again. The guards stiffened when they saw him. "Alpha, leave us," he ordered. Leave us," he ordered. They obeyed without question, vanishing into the shadows. Cale descended the steps slowly this time, torchlight licking at the walls. Elias was still there, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. His head rested against the wall, damp hair clinging to his face. The chains rattled softly as Cale approached. "You still haven't learned to sleep," Cale said quietly. Elias opened his eyes, exhaustion swimming in their depths. "I sleep better when I forget what I've lost." Cale stopped a few feet away. "You speak like a poet for a man in chains." Yola? You speak like someone who's had time to think, Elias replied. You don't give much else down here. Kale studied him. There was no defiance in Elias's tone, only truth. The Omega's hands trembled, but his gaze did not waver. Kale reached into his coat and pulled out a small vial of water, setting it beside him. A drink. Before you faint again. Elias hesitated, then nodded once. The faint clink of glass against metal echoed as he lifted it with unsteady hands. When he drank, Kale caught a glimpse of something he hadn't expected. Gratitude, quiet and real. For a long while, neither spoke. The storm outside faded to a soft patter, the calm after fury. Kale leaned against the wall, watching the flame dance across the stone. Why did you say that? He asked finally. About the air. Elias lowered his gaze. Because it's true. Kale felt the world tilt. Don't play with me. I'm not, Elias whispered. At the night you locked me here, I already carried your scent. The moon marked me because she knew what you refused to see. Kale's breath caught. His instincts, every fiber of his alpha blood, reacted to the words. His heart beat louder, faster. Impossible. Elias smiled faintly, a mix of sorrow and defiance. You can chain me, Kale, but you can't chain what's already been chosen. And boy had he been chosen. Kale stepped forward, his voice low, dangerous. If you're lying, I'm not. Elias's eyes shone under the torchlight, silver and wet. You felt it too. That hung between us. You thought it was guilt. It wasn't. The torches flickered as if the very air grew restless. Kale's pulse thundered in his ears. He wanted to deny it, but the truth pressed against his skin like heat. Every instinct, every heartbeat screaming recognition. He turned away abruptly, his voice shaking. You'll stay here until I decide what to do. Elias closed his eyes. The moon has already decided. Kale didn't answer. He walked to the door, each step heavier than the last. When he reached the top of the stairs, thunder rumbled once more through the mountains. He paused, his hand on the iron latch, and looked back just once. The Omega sat in the darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of his mark. And though the chain still bound him, Kale could not shake the feeling that it was he, not Elias, who had become the prisoner. The night after Kale's second visit, the fortress seemed quieter than usual. The storm had passed, leaving behind a hollow kind of silence, the kind that made every sound feel like an intrusion. The torches burned lower, and the scent of wet ash lingered through the halls. Kale hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elias's face, heard the echo of his words. The air is already waiting. He told himself it was madness, an Omega's trick to survive another day, yet his instincts refused to rest. The mark. The hum. The undeniable pull between them. It was not coincidence. It was something ancient, something the moon itself might have whispered into existence. At dawn, Kale descended the dungeon steps again, though he told no one he would. He told himself it was to confirm the truth, but deep inside, he knew it was because silence had begun to sound too much like Elias's absence. The cell smelled of damp iron and dust. Elias sat against the wall, his head bowed, chains lying loose against his wrists. His skin looked paler in the thin morning light, fragile as parchment. When he heard Kale's footsteps, he didn't lift his head. You came early, Elias said softly. Kale stopped just outside the bars. You said something last night. Something that can't be true. Elias's lips curved faintly. You mean the truth you're too afraid to believe? Kale stepped closer, his voice steady but low. You claim to carry my heir. Do you realize what that means? Elias looked up then, eyes silver and tired. I do. It means the moon chose you and me, even when we didn't choose each other. Kale gritted his teeth. You think the moon would bless a bond born of betrayal? Elias tilted his head, the faintest trace of pain flashing across his face. Betrayal, he repeated. You still don't see it, do you? You were never betrayed by me. Then who? Kale demanded. Elias lowered his gaze. The answer to that lies beneath your throne, not in my chains. Kale frowned. Speak clearly. Elias's voice dropped, fragile as breath. The night your brother died, I heard things. Whispers from the council chamber. They feared your bloodline. They feared what would happen if an Omega ever bore an Alpha's heir. So they made sure your brother didn't live long enough to protect you from them. Kale went still. The air in the dungeon thickened, pressing against his chest. You're lying. Elias's expression didn't waver. If I were, you wouldn't be trembling. Kale's hand closed around the iron bars, knuckles white. For years, the story had been simple. His brother fell in an ambush. Elias had led the scouts astray, and Kale's heart had been carved hollow. hollow. But now the certainty he'd built his anger upon began to crack. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he asked. Elias looked away. "Because the moment I tried, they chained me here, and you didn't let me speak." Cale said nothing. The torch beside him sputtered, throwing sparks across the stone. He thought of the parchment on his desk, the council's demand for execution, and the way their messenger had avoided his gaze. A quiet laugh escaped Elias, soft and broken. "You still think chains can silence truth? Tell me then, what does it mean when the mark appears on one who has betrayed me?" Marin's gaze drifted toward the window. "It means the moon believes in what you do not." "I'm not interested in riddles," Cale snapped. Her expression didn't waver. "Then, listen carefully. The moon mark does not appear for comfort or convenience. It appears to correct what has been broken. When the moon chooses, it is not for joy. It is for balance, for consequence." Cale frowned. "You're saying this is punishment?" Marin smiled faintly. "Perhaps for both of you." He turned away, frustration burning under his skin. "He claims he carries my heir." The priestess's eyes flickered briefly, a shadow of surprise passing through them. "And you doubt it?" Eve refused to believe it, he said. "It's impossible." "Impossible," she repeated softly, "is a word the moon never learned." She rose slowly, her bracelets chiming in the quiet. The child of such a union would be neither alpha nor omega, something beyond the order of our kind. "You understand what that means?" Cale's voice dropped to a growl. "It means danger." Marin met his gaze, unflinching. "It means change, and change always comes with blood." Her words lingered long after she left, their weight pressing against his chest like iron. The room felt colder now, emptier. Cale reached for the parchment again, then pushed it aside. He couldn't do it. Not until he knew. Not until he saw that mark again with his own eyes. The decision came like instinct. He left his chamber, cloak drawn tight, and made his way down to the dungeons. The guards looked startled when he appeared for the third night in a row, but none dared question him. The torches burned lower than before, shadows curling along the stone like living things. Elias was awake when Cale entered, sitting quietly with his back against the wall. His eyes lifted immediately, calm but weary, as if he had been waiting. "You return sooner each time," he murmured. Cale stepped closer, his voice firm. "Show me your wrist." Elias's brows furrowed. "Why?" "Because I command it." For a moment, Elias didn't move. Then slowly, he lifted his right hand, chains clinking softly as he turned it palm up. The faint silvery glow shimmered beneath his skin again. Soft, alive, pulsing like a living thing. Cale crouched, his gaze fixed on it. The mark was clearer now, crescent-shaped, threaded with tiny lines of light that traced toward the pulse of his veins. Without thinking, Cale reached out. The moment his fingers touched the mark, a wave of heat surged through him. Gentle at first, then fierce, flooding his chest. His breath caught, and he felt the same hum rise again in the air, as though the moon herself exhaled between them. Elias flinched, but didn't pull away. "Do you feel it?" he whispered. Cale's throat worked, words failing him. The hum grew louder, threading through his heartbeat, through the iron and stone, through every nerve in his body. For a brief instant, the dungeon was filled with light. The torches flaring brighter, shadows scattering like frightened birds. Then it was gone. Cale staggered back, his hand trembling. The air tasted of rain and smoke. Elias's wrist still glowed faintly, but now the mark looked brighter, complete. "What did you do?" Cale demanded, his voice raw. "Nothing," Elias said softly. "You did." Cale's heart thundered. He had touched him before, but this was different. The mark had reacted, as if recognizing him, sealing something unseen. He turned toward the door, desperate for air, but Elias's voice followed him. "The bond can't be undone now, Cale. Whether you believe in it or not. The moon already has." Cale froze, his pulse roared in his ears. He wanted to deny it, to crush the thought before it rooted itself deeper. But deep inside, beneath all the rage and fear, something else had already begun to stir. Strange, trembling certainty that the moon had never made a mistake. He looked back once more, and for the first time, he wasn't sure which of them was truly bound. The storm returned that night, wilder than before. It swept through the fortress like a living creature, howling against the walls, shaking the torches until shadows danced madly across the stone. The guards hurried to seal the lower levels, shouting orders above the roar of thunder, but even the heavy iron doors groaned beneath the weight of the wind. Water began to seep down through the cracks of the dungeon floor, pooling around the chains where Elias lay. Kale had barely reached his chambers when one of the guards rushed in, breathless and pale. "Alpha," he gasped. "The lower cells, they're flooding. If the storm worsens, the prisoners won't last the night." Kale's eyes narrowed. "And the Omega? His cell is nearest the drain." "It's already filled to his knees." Before the man finished speaking, Kale was gone. The corridors were alive with chaos, servants rushing, flames guttering, the air thick with the scent of rain and metal. He descended the dungeon steps 2 at a time, his cloak catching on the railing, his boots striking through the rising water. When he reached the cell, the torchlight reflected off the flood like liquid glass. Elias was slumped against the wall, chains taut, his head bowed, breath shallow. The water had risen nearly to his waist, his skin, pale and glistening, trembled under the cold. "Elias," Kale called, his voice sharp, cutting through the storm's noise. The Omega stirred faintly, eyes fluttering open. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "The flood." Kale didn't answer. He drew his sword, striking the lock. The metal shrieked but held. Again. Again. On the third blow, it cracked open, the echo swallowed by thunder. He waded through the freezing water and caught Elias under the arms, lifting him as if he weighed nothing. The Omega shivered violently, his breath catching in short, broken gasps. "Hold on," Kale muttered. Elias tried to speak, but his voice was lost in the rush of water. Kale tightened his grip and carried him up the steps, every movement deliberate, controlled. The storm lashed harder as they emerged into the upper corridor, rain spilling through the open archways. The scent of it, wild, electric, alive, filled the air, clinging to their skin. Kale kicked open the nearest door and entered his own chamber. The fire had nearly died, but it was warmer than the halls. He laid Elias on the rug before the hearth, the Omega's wet clothes clinging to his frame. His lips were blue, his hands trembling. Kale knelt beside him, stripping away the soaked cloak and pressing a thick fur blanket over his shoulders. "Stay awake," he ordered, his voice low, steady. Elias blinked slowly, his voice faint. "You should have left me." "Be silent," Kale said, though his tone lacked its usual command. His hands lingered on the Omega's shoulders longer than necessary. He felt the faint tremor beneath his touch, the fragile rhythm of his pulse. The room filled with the scent of rain and smoke, a strange calm threading between them despite the chaos outside. Kale stared into the fire for a moment, then turned back to him. "You said the bond cannot be undone," he murmured. "Then tell me, why does it feel like it's undoing me instead?" Elias's eyes opened halfway, their silver hue catching the firelight. "Because it's not meant to destroy," he whispered. "It's meant to remind." Kale frowned. "Remind me of what?" "That you once knew how to love." The words sank deep, cutting through the last of his composure. He looked away, jaw clenched, but the truth of it burned hotter than the flames. He had forgotten what it meant to care, to reach out without suspicion or command. Yet here he was, kneeling before the one he had chained, unable to walk away. Outside, the storm roared against the fortress walls, rain drumming like a heartbeat. Kale reached for the towel by the hearth and began to dry Elias's hands. The gesture was quiet, almost reverent. Elias watched him through half-lidded eyes, a flicker of disbelief softening his face. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. Kale didn't look up. "You would have drowned if I hadn't. That's not what I meant." His hands stilled, fingers still resting against Elias's wrist where the mark glowed faintly through his skin. The light pulsed once, syncing with Kale's heartbeat. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then Elias whispered, "You still don't understand, do you?" Kale met his gaze. "Then explain it to me." Minaren. "The bond isn't just a mark," Elias said, voice weak but steady. "It's memory. Every time you touch me, it reminds you of what you tried to forget. That's why it hurts." Kale's throat tightened. "You think I'm afraid of you?" "No," Elias said, a faint smile touching his lips. "You're afraid of what I make you remember." Lightning flashed, throwing their shadows across the walls, his tall and sharp, Elias's small and trembling, yet somehow their outlines touched. Kale felt something in his chest shift, fragile and dangerous. He rose suddenly, turning away. "Rest. The healer will bring something warm." Elias closed his eyes, exhaustion washing over him. The rain softened outside, its rhythm slowing to a steady whisper. Kale stood at the window, staring at the sky. The scent of rain lingered on his skin, mingling with the faint trace of lavender that had once meant home. He didn't understand it fully. Not the mark, not the bond, not the ache that grew stronger every time he looked at Elias, but he knew one thing with unsettling clarity. The moon had chosen him long before he ever thought to question why. The fire had long burned down to embers by the time Cale stirred again. The storm had quieted into a low, mournful drizzle, the kind that clung to the fortress walls and whispered through the cracks. Elias slept on the couch beside the hearth, his breathing slow but even. His chains had been removed, yet his wrists still bore faint bruises, ghosts of the nights spent in darkness. Cale sat across from him, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the flickering coals. He told himself he was only keeping watch to ensure the Omega didn't flee, but the lie felt heavy. Each time Elias shifted in his sleep, Cale's heart jolted with an instinct that had nothing to do with duty. The mark between them pulsed faintly, a silent reminder of the bond that neither of them had chosen, yet neither could deny. When dawn broke, pale and hesitant, a soft knock came at the chamber door. Cale rose, motioning for silence as he opened it. Lady Marin, the moon priestess, stood in the corridor, her cloak glistening with dew. Her expression was calm, but her eyes, those ancient knowing eyes, held something heavier than before. "Forgive the hour," she said softly. "The moon spoke last night. I was told to come." Cale stepped aside, and she entered quietly, her gaze falling to the figure asleep by the fire. Her breath caught for only a moment. "So it's true," she murmured. "The Omega still lives." Cale's voice was low. "He would have drowned if I hadn't intervened." Marin's eyes lifted to his. "You speak as though you regret saving him." He didn't respond. She walked closer to the fire, kneeling beside Elias. The faint glow of the moon mark shimmered beneath the Omega's wrist. Her fingers hovered above it, not touching, but close enough that Cale saw the air between them shimmer faintly. "The prophecy warned us of this," she whispered. Cale's brow furrowed. "What prophecy?" Marin looked up, her voice quieter than breath. "The moon's child, born not of rank, but of balance, an heir of the two halves that should never meet, Alpha and Omega, bound under one light." Cale felt a chill crawl down his spine. "You're saying—" "I'm saying," she interrupted gently, "that if what he carries is truly yours, then the moon has already set the course. No Alpha can escape a bond written in the light of her mark." Cale's throat tightened. "And if I refuse it?" Marin stood slowly, her presence commanding despite her softness. "Then you defy the moon herself." The last Alpha who tried met his end before dawn. The words hung in the air like smoke. Cale turned away, pacing toward the window. Outside, the mist rolled across the valley, swallowing the forests in silver haze. "I will not let fate chain me to a prophecy," he said. Marin's expression softened. "It isn't a chain, Cale. It's a mirror. What you see in him, what you fear, is what the moon placed in you long ago." Cale glanced back at Elias, who stirred faintly, murmuring something in his sleep. The sight tore through the last of his defenses, though he would never admit it. He had spent his life commanding armies, conquering rivals, bending kingdoms to his will. But the quiet weight of the Omega's presence was something he could neither command nor ignore. And nor. Marin approached, lowering her voice. "There's more. The council moves against you. They know the mark binds you. They will not allow an airborne of it to live." Cale's jaw clenched. "They wouldn't dare." "They already have," she said. "They've sent word to the southern packs. By the next full moon, they will demand your oath, or your throne." A low growl escaped him. The priestess didn't flinch. "Then let them come," he said darkly. "I'll remind them who commands the north." Marin shook her head. "You misunderstand. This is not a war of swords, Cale. This is a war of faith. They will not fight you. They will curse you, and the moon does not protect those who deny her calling." Cale's hand curled into a fist. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Listen," she said simply. "The moon does not send her will without purpose. You must hear what she has chosen to show you." He exhaled sharply. "And how do I do that?" "Pray to the sky?" Marin's eyes softened with a trace of pity. "This. No, Alpha, you listened to the one she marked for you." She gestured toward Elias. "He carries the answer you refuse to face." Cale followed her gaze. Elias's breathing had steadied again, peaceful for the first time since the dungeon. Something about the way the morning light touched his face made Cale pause. It struck him with quiet horror that for the first time in years, he wanted someone to stay. When he turned back, the priestess was already at the door. "Be careful, Cale," she said. "A prophecy is not mercy. It's truth, dressed as warning." He watched her leave, her footsteps fading into the corridor until only silence remained. The fire crackled softly, the scent of rain still lingering in the air. Cale sat beside Elias once more. The Omega stirred, his voice a whisper. "Was she here?" She was, Cale replied. Elias opened his eyes slowly, silver and weary. And what did she tell you? Hesitated. That the moon made a mistake. Elias smiled faintly, a sadness behind it. The moon never makes mistakes, only men do. Cale didn't answer. Finally, his gaze dropped to the faint mark glowing on Elias's wrist, its light pulsing gently, like a heartbeat that echoed his own. Outside, the drizzle faded, leaving behind a fragile silence, the kind that comes before something changes forever. The silence that followed the priestess's departure felt heavier than thunder. Cale remained seated beside the hearth long after dawn fully broke, staring into the embers until they blurred into memory. The firelight flickered across Elias's face, soft and pale. Every breath he took pulling Cale deeper into the realization that something irreversible had already begun between them. The moon mark still glowed faintly beneath Elias's skin, a quiet pulse that refused to die down, as if mocking Cale's denial. He rose and crossed to the window. The valley beyond drowned in mist. The air smelled of rain and pine, the aftermath of the storm. His hand moved protectively toward his stomach again, though he tried to hide it. Cale noticed. He turned to the guard. Tell them I'll meet them in the throne hall. When the man left, Cale turned back to Elias. The firelight cast them both in shades of gold and shadow. They cannot know, Cale said. Elias met his eyes. They already suspect. Then I'll give them something else to see. Cale pulled the cloak from his shoulders and draped it around Elias's frame. You will stay here until I return. Do not speak to anyone. Elias frowned. And if they ask for me? Cale's gaze was dark, resolute. Then I'll give them a reason to fear asking again. Elias searched his face, as if looking for something still human beneath the Alpha's cold command. You're protecting me, he said softly, more to himself than to Cale. Cale turned toward the door. Don't mistake survival for mercy. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. What he was doing wasn't duty. It was instinct, raw and primal, pulling him toward the impossible truth that was now bound to both their fates. As the door closed behind him, Elias leaned back against the chair, eyes falling to the mark that still glowed faintly on his wrist. It pulsed once, soft, steady, alive. And outside, as Cale descended the stairs toward the awaiting council, thunder rolled across the mountains again, carrying the quiet echo of a promise the moon had already sealed. Great Hall trembled beneath the storm's distant echo as Cale stood before the council. Their cloaks, dark as ravens' wings, fanned across the dais where the High Elder presided. The air was thick with incense and the cold scent of judgment. Cale's eyes, hard as tempered steel, met the Elder's without flinching. The Omega was found guilty of deception, the Elder intoned. You were ordered to execute him before the full moon. Instead, you shelter him. Cale's voice came quiet but sharp. He is still under my jurisdiction. I decide the hour of his fate. A murmur rippled through the council. You defy decree, another said. I obey the moon, Cale replied. And she has yet to speak of his death. The Elder's lips thinned. Be careful, Alpha. The moon does not protect those who claim her voice in arrogance. Cale said nothing more. He knew their patience was wearing thin and that every moment Elias remained alive was a blade pressed against his own throat. When the council finally withdrew, Cale lingered in the hall's emptiness, the echo of their threat following him like shadow. He returned to his chambers swiftly, but the room was empty. The cloak he had given Elias lay folded neatly on the chair. The fire had gone cold. The faint scent of lavender and rain still lingered in the air, but the man himself was gone. Cale's heartbeat slammed against his ribs. He stormed into the corridor, summoning a guard with a single shout. Lock the gates, seal the stables. No one leaves the fortress. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. Instinct led him down the back halls, through corridors that still dripped with rainwater from the storm. The scent of Elias, subtle, distinct, lingered faintly along the path. It led him toward the old west wing, where the walls had crumbled to ruin decades ago, and then he saw her. Leora, his sister, standing beside the archway, cloak drawn tightly around her shoulders. Her face was pale in the torchlight, guilt shining through her eyes. You helped him, Cale said quietly. Leora didn't deny it. He would have died here, Cale. You know it. He's under my protection. A protection? She whispered bitterly. He's a prisoner. He's a prisoner. You can't keep him chained to a prophecy you don't even believe in. Cale took a step closer, his voice dark. Do you know what he carries? I know enough, she said. And I know you'll destroy him before you ever let him prove. He moved past her into the ruined passage, his boots striking the damp stone. The corridor opened onto the old courtyard, overgrown and slick with moss. But the thought of fulfilling it now made him feel hollow, as though he'd have to carve out the last piece of himself to obey. He turned from the window, his gaze falling on Elias. The Omega's face was half lit by the fire, soft and fragile. Even in sleep, he seemed haunted, his hand resting instinctively over the place where life now stirred within him. Kale moved closer, crouching beside him, careful not to wake him. The scent of rain still lingered on his skin. He reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from Elias's forehead. The contact was brief, but it burned through him like confession. The bond between them pulsed faintly, an echo beneath his heartbeat. He didn't know when it had begun to feel less like a curse and more like truth. He rose slowly, every movement deliberate, as if afraid to break the moment. The decision forming inside him felt both unbearable and inevitable. He could not defy the council forever. He could not keep Elias locked here under their watch. There was only one way to save him now. Kale crossed to the writing desk and drew open the drawer. Inside lay the old seal of the Northern House, an iron crest that marked every command he ever issued. He stared at it for a long time before setting it aside. Tonight, he would use no decree, no soldiers, no orders. Tonight, he would disobey everything that had once defined him. When the moon rose above the valley, Kale pulled his cloak around his shoulders and returned to Elias's side. "Awake," he said softly. Elias stirred, eyes fluttering open. For a moment, confusion clouded his face. "You shouldn't. Quiet," Kale said gently. "There's no time." Elias blinked up at him, searching his face for meaning. Kale knelt and loosened the ties of the cloak, wrapping it carefully around him. "You'll take the western path," he said. "It leads down through the ravine to the river. Follow it until the trees thin. After that, head north. There's a village, old allies. They'll keep you hidden." Elias froze, disbelief flickering across his face. "You're letting me go?" Kale's expression didn't change, though something inside him cracked. "You can't stay here. They'll come for you before dawn. The council has spies even among my guard. You said you'd protect me." "I am," Kale replied, "by sending you away." Elias pushed himself upright, his voice trembling. "And what about you? When they find I've gone, they'll find nothing." His voice was quiet, but resolute. "I'll let them think I killed you. It's the only way this ends without your blood on their hands." The words fell heavy between them, heavier than the silence that followed. Elias's eyes glistened faintly in the firelight. "You think I'll survive alone out there?" Kale looked at him for a long time. "You've survived worse." Elias let out a soft, bitter laugh. "I used to think you didn't have a heart." "I still don't," Kale said, though his voice betrayed him. He helped Elias stand, steadying him when his legs faltered. Their closeness made the air hum again, that faint, undeniable current between them. Elias's gaze lifted, locking with his. "Why now?" he asked. After everything, Kale hesitated. The truth clawed at his throat, but he spoke it anyway. "Because if I keep you here, I'll lose more than a kingdom." Elias's breath caught, a quiet sound swallowed by the fire. Kale took his hand then briefly, pressing something into his palm, a small silver pendant marked with the crest of the Northern House. "Show this to no one unless you must. It'll buy you safety, and remind you who you are." Elias looked down at it, the metal gleaming against his skin. "So you're still lying to yourself," he whispered. "You think you're sending me away for my sake, but it's because you can't bear what staying would make you feel." Kale said nothing. Outside, the wind rose again, brushing against the shutters like a final warning. He moved to the door and opened it. The hall beyond washed in moonlight. "Go now," he said. Elias hesitated only a moment before stepping past him, his cloak whispering against the floor. When he reached the threshold, he turned back. "The moon will judge you kindly for this." Kale shook his head. "I doubt that." Their eyes met one last time. Then Elias turned and disappeared into the corridor, his footsteps fading like a ghost's retreating heartbeat. Kale stood there long after the silence returned, staring into the emptiness where he had stood. He felt the bond still pulsing faintly beneath his skin, as if part of him still followed. When dawn finally broke, Kale stood by the window once more. The mist was lifting from the valley, the first sunlight glinting off the river far below. He imagined Elias somewhere out there, free for the first time, hidden beneath the same rising light. And though the world would soon call him executioner, Kale Dravian had never done anything more merciful than the night he let him go. The first snow arrived 3 nights after Elias vanished into the forest. It came quietly without thunder or wind, just a slow drifting of white that covered the ruins of autumn like a shroud. The fortress, once alive with the rhythm of soldiers and song, fell into a silence so deep that even the fires seemed to burn softer. Cale walked its empty halls like a shadow, his voice rarely heard, his orders short and cold. The council's decree had been fulfilled in their eyes, the traitor gone, the alpha unchallenged, but the truth of it hung inside him like a wound that refused to heal. He had let Elias go, but he had not been able to let him leave his mind. Every corridor still carried echoes of his voice. Every window seemed to hold the faint scent of rain. Nights bled into days, and days into a gray stretch of waiting, where the only thing that reminded him time was moving was the frost crawling up the edges of the glass. The council visited once more before the solstice, demanding renewal of his oath. They found an alpha colder than the snows outside, obedient, restrained, and utterly unreadable. They believed his silence was loyalty. Only Cale knew it was morning. Leora saw through it, of course. She always did. One evening, she entered his study without knocking, holding a candle that flickered against the frostbitten walls. Her gaze swept over the untouched scrolls, the cold hearth, the man sitting rigid before it all. "You've turned this place into a tomb," she said softly. Cale didn't look up. It was never anything else. "You let him go," she said, stepping closer, "and yet you're still chained." His jaw tightened. "Don't start. I'm not here to judge you," she said, her voice gentle. "I just want to know, when will you forgive yourself?" Cale's hand closed around the armrest of his chair. "Forgiveness is for the innocent." Leora sighed, setting the candle down. "And what about him?" He was carrying more than his own fate when he left. That struck something in him. His head turned sharply. "You knew?" "I suspected," she said. "The moon's mark doesn't glow for nothing. You feel it too, don't you? Even now." He looked away, but the faint flicker in his expression betrayed him. The bond had never quieted. Even across distance, it pulsed faintly, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in moments of stillness, when the world seemed to pause and remind him he was no longer alone, no matter how far apart they were. "I feel it," he admitted, the words rough. "And it feels like punishment?" Leora's eyes softened. And maybe it's a reminder. But Cale didn't answer. When she left, the candlelight faded, leaving him alone with the whisper of the snow against the window. As the weeks turned to months, winter deepened. The river froze over, the wolves vanished into hibernation, and the moon seemed to hang lower in the sky, heavier with silence. Cale spent his nights in the watchtower, staring north, toward the path Elias would have taken, toward the forests that swallowed him whole. He told himself he watched out of duty, to guard the borders, to ensure the council's enemies didn't encroach. But deep inside, he was searching for something he could never admit aloud. A flicker of movement, a scent carried by the wind, any sign that the Omega had survived. One night, as he stood on the balcony, snow clinging to his cloak, the wind shifted. It brought with it a scent so faint he thought he imagined it. Lavender and rain, blurred with the cold. His heart stilled. He leaned over the railing, scanning the woods, but there was nothing there, only the endless white stretching into darkness. Still, the scent lingered, curling through the air like memory. It vanished as quickly as it came, but it was enough. He descended from the tower, heading straight for the old chapel where Marianne, the priestess, still kept her vigil. She looked up from her candles as he entered, her eyes glimmering in the dim light. "You felt it," she said quietly, as though reading his thoughts. Cale stopped before her, snow melting from his shoulders. If the bond still breathes, it means he's alive. Marin nodded. "The moon does not waste her light, but be warned, life is not always mercy." Cale's breath caught. "Tell me what you mean." She rose, moving closer, her expression unreadable. "The child grows, the prophecy unfolds, but where there is life, there will be pursuit. The council's spies are not as blind as you think." He froze. "They know?" "They suspect," she said. "And when spring comes, suspicion will turn to blood." Cale's hands clenched at his sides. "Then I'll find him first." Marin's gaze softened with sorrow. "You'll find him when the moon wills it, not before." He left the chapel in silence, but her warning stayed with him. That night, for the first time since Elias's departure, Cale dreamt. Not of battle or betrayal, but of the forest. Of snow melting into thaw. Of a single howl echoing through the trees, carrying both pain and promise. He woke before dawn, heart pounding, the bond between them burning faintly beneath his skin. He didn't know where Elias was, or whether the dream was a vision or mere longing, but he knew one thing with certainty. Something in the world had shifted. Outside, the snow had stopped. The first hint of spring wind touched the air, thin but alive. Cale turned toward the horizon, where the mountains met the mist. "Stay alive," he whispered, not as a command, but as a prayer. And somewhere beyond that horizon, beneath the same pale moonlight, a heartbeat answered him. The thaw came slowly that year, as though the earth itself hesitated to wake from its long sleep. Snow melted into rivers that cut through the frozen soil, carrying whispers of what had been buried beneath. The fortress, draped in mist and silence, stirred with the first breath of spring, but Cale did not share in its renewal. He moved through its halls like a specter, haunted by the same ache that had followed him through every cold night of winter. Each dawn began the same. He stood at the tower window, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for a sign that never came. The bond had grown quieter since the storm. The faint hum that once threaded through his chest had dulled to a fragile echo. It frightened him more than he cared to admit. He could no longer tell if the silence meant peace or the end of something he had never truly understood. That evening, as dusk bled into the mountains, a guard burst into the throne hall, breathless and pale. "Alpha," he gasped. "There's movement at the northern border. We thought it was rogues, but..." His words faltered. Cale rose slowly. "About what?" "It's one of ours. Alone. He carries the mark of the moon." The room seemed to shrink around him. For the first time in months, Cale felt his pulse quicken, not with rage, but with something perilously close to hope. "Where?" By the ruins of the old temple, near the river. Cale didn't wait for more. He was already moving before the guard finished speaking, cloak whipping behind him as he strode through the gates and into the twilight. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of wet pine and thawing earth. Each step echoed with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Steady, rising, relentless. The forest was alive with sound. The snowmelt trickled between roots. Birds cried overhead, and somewhere distant, a wolf howled. A long, mournful note that made the hairs on his neck rise. It wasn't the howl of hunger or warning. It was grief. It was love. It was alive. It was Elias. Cale broke into a run, branches clawing at his arms, mud splashing beneath his boots. The howl came again, closer this time, echoing through the trees. When he reached the clearing, the world fell still. There, beneath the skeletal remains of the ancient temple, stood Elias. He was thinner, paler, his clothes worn from travel, his hair tangled by wind and rain. But he was alive, and in his arms, wrapped in cloth as pale as moonlight, was a child. For a long moment, neither moved. The air between them trembled, heavy with everything left unsaid. Cale's chest rose and fell, his breath shallow. Elias looked up, silver eyes glinting with a mixture of defiance and relief. "You found me," he said softly. Cale stepped forward, words caught somewhere between disbelief and awe. "You shouldn't be here." Elias smiled faintly. "You say that every time day, you said that every time..." Cale's gaze dropped to the bundle in his arms. "Is that..." Elias nodded before he could finish. "Your heir. Our son." The world seemed to tilt. Cale took another step closer, slow and cautious, as though any sudden movement might shatter the fragile moment between them. The child stirred, a small sound escaping from beneath the blanket, a soft, steady heartbeat that seemed to echo through the clearing. Cale's throat tightened. "He's real." Elias looked down at the child, his voice tender. "He's more than that. He's what the moon promised." The words struck him like a blow and a blessing all at once. Cale knelt before them, his hand trembling as he reached out. "May I?" Elias hesitated, then nodded. Cale brushed back the blanket, revealing a small face framed by wisps of pale hair. The child's skin shimmered faintly under the light, as though the moon itself had kissed him. And on his tiny wrist, a mark, faint but unmistakable, glowed the same crescent that bound them both. Cale exhaled sharply, awe breaking through the layers of restraint he had built. "He carries it." Elias's voice softened. "He carries both of us." A sudden rustle broke the stillness. Cale's instincts sharpened instantly. His eyes darted toward the tree line. Movement, faint but certain. Shadows. He rose, placing himself between Elias and the sound. "We're not alone." From the woods emerged 3 riders, cloaked in the gray of the council's guard. Their leader raised a torch, the flame flickering against the mist. "Alpha Cale Dravian," he called. "By order of the High Council, the Omega and the child are to be surrendered for judgment." Cale's voice was calm, but his tone cut like steel. "This is my land. You have no authority here." The guard dismounted, drawing his blade. "Then you defy the decree?" May defy the decree? Might defy cowards who mistake fear for law. The torchlight wavered as the wind picked up, scattering sparks into night. The leader hesitated, glancing at the child in Elias's arms. That thing is an abomination, Alpha. You damn your bloodline for it? Kale moved before the man finished. The clash of metal rang through the clearing, sharp and final. The first guard fell, his blade shattered in Kale's hand. The others faltered, fear breaking their resolve. I tell the council, Kale said coldly, that if they come for him again, I'll answer with war. The surviving men fled, their horses vanishing into the mist. When silence returned, Kale turned back to Elias. He was pale, clutching the child tightly to his chest. They'll come again, Elias whispered. You've given them reason. I've given them warning, Kale said, his voice low. And if the moon stands between us and them, then so be it. Elias stared at him for a long moment, the firelight of the torch flickering across his face. You've changed. Kale's gaze softened. No, I've remembered. He reached out, brushing his fingers against the child's hand. The tiny fingers curled around his own, small but certain. The bond flared again, stronger now, alive. The air hummed with it, warm and bright, wrapping around the three of them like a vow. For the first time in months, Kale felt something close to peace. But beneath it, he knew this night was only the beginning. The council would not forgive. The prophecy was far from complete, and the child of the forbidden moon. His heir had just changed everything. The forest had gone still again after the clash, as if the very trees held their breath. The last embers of the torches faded, leaving behind the smell of iron and rain. Kale stood over the fallen guard for a moment, his sword dripping into the earth. Then, slowly, he looked back toward Elias. The Omega was kneeling by the old temple wall, the child pressed close to his chest, eyes wide and trembling in the dark. Kale sheathed his weapon and crossed the clearing. His steps were careful this time, quiet. When he stopped before Elias, the distance between them felt heavier than the miles that had once separated them. They won't stop, Elias said softly, his voice strained. You've seen it now. They'll hunt until there's nothing left of us. Kale crouched beside him. Then they'll have to find us first. Elias's lips parted, disbelief flickering across his face. You're serious. Kale's gaze dropped briefly to the child's sleeping form, the faint glow of the moonmark glimmering through the blanket. I've seen too much tonight to pretend I'm not. Elias studied him for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You've changed, he whispered. Kale's voice came quiet but firm. I know. I've finally begun to understand what the moon's been trying to tell me. The wind stirred the branches above them, scattering flakes of frost that shimmered in the light. Kale's eyes met Elias's again, steady, searching. You said before that you didn't betray me. That the council did. I want the truth. All of it. No riddles. No silence. Elias's breath caught. He looked away, his fingers tightening around the child as though drawing strength from him. But you won't want to hear it. I've spent years hating a ghost of my own making, Kale said. You owe me the truth, Elias, and I owe you the chance to speak it. For a long time there was only the whisper of wind through the trees. Then Elias exhaled slowly, the weight of his silence breaking. That night, the one your brother died. It wasn't a battle ambush. It was an execution. Kale's chest tightened. Execution? The council planned it. They told him there was a peace meeting beyond the ridge. I overheard their messengers, but when I tried to warn him, it caught me. I wasn't allowed to leave the fortress, not until it was too late, when I escaped and found the field. His voice cracked, the words trembling. There was nothing left to save. Kale stared at him. The memory of that night, clawing back, the fire, the smell of blood, his brother's body among the fallen. He had blamed Elias for not being there, for disobeying his orders. But the truth unraveled everything. The betrayal had never been Elias's. It had been born from the very council he had sworn to serve. His voice came low, almost unrecognizable. You tried to tell me. I did, Elias whispered. But by the time you came to the dungeon, they'd already poisoned you with their lies. And he hesitated, his voice breaking. You let you believe them, because I thought if you hated me, they would spare you. Kale's eyes darkened. That they killed my brother to control me. They feared the prophecy. Elias said softly. The priestess once told them the heir of two worlds would rise through your bloodline. A child born of unity, not rank. They thought your brother would bring it about. When he fell, they turned their fear toward you. And when the moon marked me, they saw their chance to end it before it began. Kale rose, pacing a few steps away. His breath came heavy, his voice thick with fury and disbelief. All this time, every war I fought, every punishment I gave, it was for their lies. Elias's eyes glistened. He wanted to tell you, Kale. Cool. But when they locked me away, I thought the moon would reveal it to you herself. I never meant for it to go this far. Kale turned back toward him, his expression unreadable. And the child. Was he the council's fear made flesh? No, Elias said firmly. He's their undoing. He looked down at the baby, his voice softening. They called him an abomination. But he's the proof that their chains are breaking. You feel it too, don't you? The bond isn't just between us anymore. It's growing through him. Kale felt it then, faint but real. A warmth radiating from the child, pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. It wasn't just the bond of mates. It was something older, deeper. The moon's light itself seemed to move within that small, fragile body. Lord, he knelt again, his hands trembling as he reached out. You risked everything for me. Elias met his gaze, tears glinting under the moonlight. You were worth it. You always were. The words broke something inside Kale that anger had long held together. He reached out and touched Elias's cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. You should have told me sooner, he said, but there was no accusation in his tone, only grief. I tried, Elias whispered, but I couldn't reach the man you'd become. Kale's breath shook as he exhaled. And now? Elias looked up at him, the faintest smile trembling at his lips. And now I think he's finally listening. For the first time in years, Kale let the silence settle not as a wall, but as peace. The past could no longer be changed, but the truth had finally been set free between them. The child stirred, a soft cry breaking the quiet. Kale looked down at him, the tiny mark glowing faintly beneath the blanket. He's our future, he said. Elias nodded, exhaustion softening his features. If we can protect him, Kale's jaw tightened. We will. The council took everything from me once. They won't take him too. Elias leaned into him, his voice faint. Then you'll have to be more than the alpha they made you. You'll have to become what the moon saw in you before the world turned cruel. Kale looked at him for a long moment, the truth of it anchoring deep. Then, quietly, he said, then that's what I'll become. The wind passed through the trees, carrying the faint scent of thawing earth and the promise of spring. The moon hung full above them, watching as if to bear witness to their truth. And for the first time since the night his brother fell, Kale no longer felt haunted. He felt chosen. Dawn crept slowly across the forest, spilling pale gold through the bare branches. The snow had thinned, revealing the dark soil beneath, damp and glistening. Kale sat against the crumbling wall of the temple ruins, the faint hum of the bond still alive in his chest. Elias rested beside him, the child nestled between them, wrapped in the same cloak that once belonged to Kale's house. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, silence wasn't the enemy silly. It was fragile, sacred. But peace was never meant to last. The child stirred, a faint whimper escaping him, and Kale reached down instinctively. The tiny fingers closed around his own, and something inside him shifted, a sense of belonging that felt both unfamiliar and infinite. The mark beneath Kale's skin burned faintly in answer, syncing with the pulse of the infant's heartbeat. He could feel it. The strength of two bloodlines, Alpha and Omega, woven together. The prophecy Marin had spoken of was no longer a warning. It was alive. Elias opened his eyes, exhaustion dimming their silver hue. He feels it too, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. He feels you. Kale looked at him, his voice rough. What happens now? Elias's lips curved faintly. And now, we make a choice, to hide or to stand. Before Kale could reply, the forest shifted, branches rustling, the faint creak of movement in the distance. His instincts flared instantly. He rose, his hand on the hilt of his sword, eyes narrowing toward the shadows between the trees. They found us, he said. Elias gathered the child close, fear flashing in his eyes. We can't fight them all. Kale glanced at him, the decision already made. You won't have to. He turned toward the sound as the first of the council's soldiers stepped into the clearing. Half a dozen, armored and grim, their blades catching the morning light. The leader stepped forward, his insignia glinting with the mark of the Elder Court. Alpha Dravian, he said coldly. You've defied your oath. You stand accused of treason and blasphemy against the moon's law. Kale's voice was calm, almost quiet. You mistake obedience for faith. The moon doesn't need your law to speak for her. The soldier's eyes flicked toward Elias and the child. And that thing is your proof? Kale's sword slid free with a whisper of steel. That child is your future. Kneel before it, and you might live to see it. The man sneered. "You've gone mad." "Maybe," Cale said softly, "but madness has always been the birthplace of change." They lunged as one, steel flashing, but Cale was fast. The first strike came clean, a blur of movement that sent 2 men to the ground before the others could react. The air filled with the clang of metal, the smell of blood and frost. Cale moved like a storm, every motion precise, deliberate, deadly. Behind him, Elias whispered a prayer beneath his breath, clutching the child tightly. The mark on his wrist flared brighter, light spilling into the air like silver fire. Cale felt it before he saw it. The surge of energy that rippled through the clearing, burning cold and pure. The moon's light itself seemed to descend, weaving through them all. The remaining soldiers faltered, shielding their eyes as the light intensified. Cale turned, stunned. Elias stood in the center of it, his body trembling, the mark burning brighter than ever. The child in his arms glowed faintly, his tiny wrist pulsing in rhythm with his mother's. Elias met Cale's gaze, his voice shaking but clear. "She's with us." Cale didn't need to ask who. The moons will thrum through the air, undeniable. The light swept across the clearing, touching each fallen soldier. Their armor cracked like ice beneath heat, and their weapons turned to ash. Those still standing dropped to their knees, faces pale with terror. Then, as suddenly as it came, the light dimmed. Elias collapsed forward, the glow fading from his skin. Cale caught him before he hit the ground, his heart pounding. The child whimpered softly, pressing closer to Elias's chest. "Elias," Cale whispered, "stay with me." Elias's eyes fluttered open, weak but serene. "It's the beginning," he breathed. "The moon is chosen. The air stands." Cale swallowed hard. "Don't speak like it's an ending." Elias smiled faintly, reaching up to touch his face. "You finally see her plan, don't you?" This was never punishment. It was grace. Cale's throat tightened, and then stay long enough to see it fulfilled. "I'll try," Elias whispered, his hand slipping back to the child. "Promise me, he'll be free." Cale's grip tightened over his. "I swear it." The soldiers fled into the forest, carrying tales they could not comprehend, of light and prophecy in a child who glowed like the moon's own flame. Cale didn't follow. He stayed there, holding Elias as the sun broke through the trees. The light was soft, warm, and it fell over the 3 of them like a benediction. When Elias's breathing steadied again, Cale looked down at the sleeping child between them. The mark on the infant's wrist shimmered faintly, twin crescents intertwining like 2 worlds converging. He brushed a hand through the child's pale hair and whispered, "You'll never be what they fear. You'll be what they could never become." Elias smiled weakly, eyes half closed. "He'll carry both of us, the Alpha and the Omega, the war and the peace." Cale's gaze softened, the words sinking deep into him. "Then he's the heir of 2 worlds." The wind moved gently through the clearing, carrying away the scent of blood and rain, leaving only the faint trace of lavender and silver light. For the first time, Cale felt the bond settle not as a burden, but as belonging. The moon had bound them not for punishment, but for balance. And through the child, through their son, she had written her final truth across the sky. The light of morning lingered longer than it should have, soft and strange, as if the moon refused to leave the sky. It hung there, pale against the dawn, casting silver over the ruins where Cale knelt. Elias lay in his arms, breathing faintly, his skin cold beneath the warmth of the newborn light. The child slept between them, silent and still, the glow of his tiny moon mark fading now to a quiet pulse. Cale could still feel the hum of power that had torn through the clearing moments ago, the divine fire that had answered Elias's call and spared them. But that same power had drained him. The Omega's body trembled with every breath, his energy burned away by the very light that had saved them. Cale pressed his forehead to Elias's, his voice raw. "Stay with me. Don't fade." Elias's eyes opened weakly, silver dulled by exhaustion, but still soft, still filled with that maddening, unbearable calm. "You always spoke like you could command the world," he whispered. "Even the moon wouldn't dare disobey you." Cale's chest tightened. "Then she'll obey one more command. She'll let you live." Elias smiled faintly. "You can't order mercy, Cale. You can only give it." The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and crushed lavender. Around them, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The fallen soldiers had fled, the echoes of their terror lost in the mist, leaving only the 3 of them beneath the fading moon. Cale looked down at the child, his small hand curling weakly against Elias's cloak. "You'll need you," he said, his voice breaking. Elias's gaze drifted toward the infant, his expression tender, full of a love that felt infinite. "He'll have both of us, you and his strength." Me and his blood. Don't speak like that, Cale murmured, his thumb brushing against Elias's cheek. You'll see him grow. You'll see him rule. Elias's smile deepened, but his voice came soft, fading. He'll rule, yes, but not over kingdoms. Over hearts. He'll be what we never were allowed to be, free. Cale swallowed hard. The moon above them was sinking lower now, its edges dimming. A faint shimmer, almost invisible, drifted through the air like falling dust. The glow touched Elias's skin, soft and silver. He looked up, his voice a whisper. She's calling. No, Cale said fiercely. You've done enough, she can't take you. Elias turned his face toward him, the faintest trace of laughter caught in his breath. You still don't understand. The moon doesn't take. She transforms. Every end is her beginning. Cale's hand trembled against the back of his neck. I can't lose you again. You won't, Elias said. You'll see me in him, in the light that falls before every storm. In the silence after every battle, his voice softened to a whisper, as if the air itself was stealing it away. That's where I'll wait. Cale's throat burned. Elias, it gathered around him like mist, threads of silver rising from his skin, weaving through the air in delicate spirals. Elias's eyes fluttered closed, his breathing slowing, his body growing lighter in Cale's arms. Cale clutched him tighter, desperate. No, don't you dare. Elias's final breath brushed against his lips, a whisper of warmth. The moon keeps her promises, and then the light took him. It didn't burst or blind. It simply unfolded, soft and infinite, until the figure in Cale's arms dissolved into it. The air shimmered where he had been, the scent of lavender and rain lingering like memory. Cale reached out, his hand passing through the light, and for an instant he swore he felt a heartbeat answer his touch before it faded completely. Silence fell. The moon, now faint and dying, sank below the trees. The dawn grew brighter, washing the clearing in gold. Cale sat motionless, the child still pressed against his chest, his arms empty but his heart impossibly full. He didn't weep. Not then. He simply sat and breathed, each exhale a vow, each inhale a memory. The world around him felt changed, softer, as though some old wound had finally been acknowledged by the sky itself. The baby stirred, letting out a small cry. Cale looked down at him, his expression breaking, something tender unraveling behind his hardened eyes. He brushed a finger across the child's hand, and the mark on his own wrist glowed faintly in answer. It wasn't gone. The bond had changed, not ended. He looked toward the rising sun, the warmth touching his face. She kept her promise, he murmured. You're both still here. The forest around him began to wake. The sound of birds, the trickle of melting snow, the faint hum of life returning. Cale rose slowly, holding the child close. The ruins behind him were quiet now, bathed in morning light. Where Elias had been, a faint circle of silver lingered on the ground, glowing softly against the soil. Cale knelt beside it, pressing his palm to the mark. The warmth spread beneath his hand, familiar, gentle, alive. Rest now, he said softly. Your light's still here. As he turned toward the valley, the child stirred again, his eyes opening for the first time. Eyes not gold like Cale's, nor silver like Elias's, but both, blending into something new. The heir of two worlds, born of defiance and destiny. Cale smiled faintly, pulling the cloak around them both. You'll carry her light, he whispered. And I'll carry you. The wind rose one last time, brushing against his hair like a touch, like a farewell, and then it was gone. By the time Cale reached the edge of the forest, the moon had vanished completely from the sky, but its light, soft and unseen, still clung to him. Years passed, but the forest never forgot that morning. Each spring when the mist lifted and the thaw returned, silver light would shimmer faintly on the temple ruins. The place where the moon had once descended, where love had rewritten the law of gods and men. The villagers called it sacred, a place where the air itself felt alive, where every petal seemed to remember a heartbeat. Cale never returned to the fortress. He left behind the iron halls and the crown that had once defined him, trading command for silence. The warlords who rose in his absence fought and fell by their own greed, but his name endured, spoken in whispers by those who remembered what he had done and what he had lost. He built a home in the northern valley, small and quiet, hidden among the pines. The child grew there, free from fear or crown, his laughter carrying through the woods like birdsong. The boy's eyes, one gold, one silver, reflected both sun and moon, and in him Cale saw everything the world could have been. Some nights when the wind turned soft and the stars shimmered low, Cale would look toward the horizon where the ruins slept, and he would feel it, the pulse of the bond that had never truly broken. It hummed faintly beneath his skin, a warmth that came not from memory, but from presence. He knew Elias was still with him, not as ghost or echo, but as light. The moon had not taken him. She had remade him. The years carved themselves quietly across Cale's face, but they did not take his strength. He taught his son to walk the forest paths, to read the signs of the wind, to listen to silence as if it spoke. And when the boy grew old enough to ask about his mother, Cale would take him outside beneath the night sky. "Do you see her?" he would ask, pointing upward. The child would nod, eyes wide. "She's watching." Always, Cale would whisper. She became the light that guides the lost. Sometimes when the moon was full, the glow on the boy's wrist would return, soft and silver, the mark pulsing in harmony with Cale's own. The two of them would stand there in the clearing, bathed in pale light, and Cale would feel that same peace he'd known the day he first held Elias beneath the temple ruins. The ache was still there, yes, but it was gentler now, an ache that healed instead of harmed. One winter night, when the child had grown into a young man and the forest slept under snow, Cale stood alone at the edge of the valley. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it that familiar scent, rain and lavender. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he was back there again. The dungeon's silence, the fire's glow, the weight of chains that had turned to light. He spoke softly into the cold air. "I kept my promise." And then he felt it, a warmth against his cheek, as though the air itself had reached out to touch him. He opened his eyes, and above him the clouds parted. The moon shone brighter than he had ever seen it, flooding the valley with its glow. For a heartbeat, he saw her. Elias stood in the light, not as he had last been, fragile and fading, but radiant whole, his eyes alive with that same silver fire. The wind swirled around him, carrying whispers Cale could almost understand. "You kept him safe," the voice said, neither sound nor thought, but both. Cale's breath trembled. "I tried. You did more than try," the whisper replied. "You learned to love without fear." He wanted to reach out, to touch the image, but the light pulsed gently, urging him not to move. The air shimmered with quiet peace. "He's grown," Cale said, his voice breaking. "He's strong. He has your kindness." Elias smiled faintly. "And your heart." The light shifted, softening, the edges of the vision beginning to fade. Cale's chest tightened. "Don't go." The whisper that followed was tender, steady. "I never left." The wind carried his words through the trees, through every leaf and branch, as if the forest itself remembered them. And when the vision faded, Cale stood beneath the silver sky, tears glistening like frost. He returned home before dawn. His son was awake, sitting by the window, the glow of the moon reflected in his mismatched eyes. "I saw her," the boy said quietly. Cale smiled, kneeling beside him. "So did I." They watched the light fade together, the first hints of morning softening the horizon. And when the boy leaned against him, head resting on his shoulder, Cale felt it again, the hum of the bond, not as weight, but as warmth. The years that followed were gentle. The boy grew into a leader unlike any other, one who ruled not by power, but by peace. When the wolves of the north bowed to him, they said the moon herself smiled that night. Cale watched from afar, proud and quiet, until the winters began to take his strength. One evening, when the snow fell in perfect silence, he sat before the fire, his son beside him, and looked out toward the pale horizon. "I'm ready," he whispered. And when his breath stilled, the moon shone so brightly that the night turned silver. In the sky above the valley, where the ruins still slept and the wind still whispered, two lights appeared beside the moon, one gold, one silver, intertwined, eternal. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, love began again.